Aviation accounts for some 2.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. While far from the largest contributor, aviation still emits over 1 billion tons of CO2 per year. Pretty soon, we need to either make aviation sustainable by electrifying it or ditch aviation entirely. So, what's the current state of electric aviation, and how far off are we from widespread sustainable flight? Heads up, I'm going to focus primarily on general aviation and especially small, light aircraft. I'll cover airliners and larger aircraft a little, but my interest and most development is focused on general aviation. Part 1. Flight schools. Right now, electric flight is undeniably viable for flight schools. You can see this through the success of aircraft like the Pipistrel Velis Electro. These are almost exclusively used for pattern work, where a single charge of the, in the case of the Velis Electro, 20 or so kilowatt-hour battery will last through an hour's worth of laps in the pattern. And that's because electric aircraft benefit from regenerative braking, the killer feature of electric motors. Very quickly, nearly all electric motors are bidirectional. You can use electricity to spin the motor, but you can also generate electricity by forcing the motor to spin. Regenerative braking makes pattern work significantly more efficient. The primary point of pattern work is to practice takeoff and especially landings. When you do pattern work, it's a lot of climbing and descending, as well as gaining and bleeding speed. Regenerative braking allows you to recover a lot of the energy you just spent taking off during your landing. Regenerative braking also allows you to dramatically shorten your approach, allowing for tighter patterns and ultimately more laps in the same amount of time. You mean building this landing brake is a waste of time? I'll cover that in a future video. Well, I'm still gonna do it. Moving on. The Velis Electro is only really useful for pattern work and basic VFR maneuvers. It has an endurance of 1.5 hours and a range of 68 nautical miles, both without reserves. You can't even take it on a cross-country long enough to count for the private pilot rating. That said, I cannot overstate how much of a game changer even this is. I spent roughly half of my primary training doing pattern work. Checking the rates for my old flight school, which now has a Velis Electro, flying that just for pattern work would have saved me a couple $1,000s. I'm lucky enough that I was able to afford all this anyway, but this will make flight much more accessible to much more people, whether they want to just check off a bucket list item, make a career out of it, or maintain it as a hobby. Anything we can do to make aviation more affordable, accessible, and sustainable is something we absolutely should be doing. But still, this is pretty short range. Surely there's electric aircraft with longer range. Part 2. Motor gliders. One area where electric flight is soaring right now is in motor gliders. Most small general aviation aircraft have glide ratios around 10:1. For every 10 units horizontal distance flown without power, it'll drop 1 unit vertical distance. Bad gliders have glide ratios around 20:1, and good gliders are much higher. When the airframe is this efficient, you can stay aloft just from the passive lift you get from the pockets of rising air that make up thermals or mountain wave lift. The motor in motorized gliders really is just to provide lift when you can't find a thermal or to get you in the air in the first place. Because of that, electric motor gliders can get away with relatively small capacity batteries, making them actually feasible. That viability plus the reduced complexities of electric motors compared to gas engines make electric motor gliders quite attractive right now. It's still important to remember that electric motor gliders still have less climb capacity compared to gas motor gliders, and they're also more expensive. But again, the simplicity and reliability of electric motors make them attractive at the high end. The downside of gliders and motor gliders is that endurance depends heavily on the weather. Under ideal circumstances, you're limited by your physical endurance more than anything else. That's part of why I'm not building an electric motor glider. I want something that I can fly without having to ride thermals. Part 3. Powered aircraft. For powered aircraft, there really isn't anything long range yet. The longest demonstrated battery electric flight that I'm aware of is from Beta, where in late 2022, their Alia EVTOL aircraft demonstrated a 336 nautical mile range in a flight lasting for 2.5 hours. This apparently was in pretty ideal circumstances. They blew through their entire reserves to make that, circling in the airport's glide cone while doing so, landing at 0% state of charge. But that's one aircraft. Every other example I found is much more conservative about their claims. Most aircraft built, shipping, or should be shipping anytime soon claims to be limited to around 90 minutes of endurance, which limits even fast aircraft to around 250 nautical miles. In the homebuilt world, there's a few people who have made flying electric aircraft. But again, these all have fairly short endurances. Here's YouTuber Emoto Dude, who put a Zero Motorcycles drive system in a Sonex Xenos motor glider, which he uses to commute to work. Which is really cool when you can make it work, but a bunch of factors need to line up to make commuting to work by airplane work. In the certified world, there's a few companies with stuff in progress. Bai Aerospace has been working to deliver the E-Flyer 2 since the mid-2010s, which promised 3 hours of endurance, but their current website makes no claims about anything. I hope they're doing okay. Diamond is working on various electric aircraft, such as the EDA-40, though the initial range on the EDA-40 is going to be something like 110 nautical miles, which still won't allow you to complete the cross-country requirements for most certificates and ratings without having to recharge at least one of the airports. On the larger side, there's things like Aviation's Alice, which is still under development. Comparing Alice to Beech's Super King Air, they're both twins carrying 11 people, but that's about where the similarities end. Alice is much heavier, slightly slower, and has a far shorter range. Alice's total endurance is also about 90 minutes right now. A King Air's endurance is measured in hours. This isn't surprising. The hard part of electric flight is not getting airborne, it's staying aloft. That's why electric motor gliders are really taking off right now. I'll see myself out. While takeoff is the most power-intensive portion of flight, cruise is where you spend the vast majority of your time. I recently bought an RV9A, which on takeoff will consume 8 to 10 gallons per hour, depending on how well I lean it. Here, with mixture full, I saw as high as 13.7 gallons per hour on the initial takeoff roll, though it did level out to 10 gallons per hour shortly after. Cruising at 10,000 feet and 120 knots indicated will consume between 5 and 6 gallons per hour. I can be at cruise altitude within 10 to 15 minutes of taking off. That's 2.5 gallons of fuel spent, while I will spend hours cruising. Most of the energy is spent in level flight during cruise. Long cruise flight is an energy management problem. You need to minimize energy usage, mostly done with a low drag airframe, and maximize your energy capacity. And that's not a thing yet with current battery technology. Part 4. Battery energy density and charging. Recent battery cells, like Panasonic's NCR2170M from 2021, have energy densities around 270 watt-hours per kilogram at the cell level. Once you add on the overhead of everything to make it into a full battery pack, you're very conservatively at around 200 watt-hours per kilogram, meaning a 100 kilowatt-hour battery will weigh approximately 500 kilograms or 110 pounds. That's a lot of battery. I only have the mass budget for about 400 kilograms of battery, and that's only if I don't install the rear seats and we carry no more than like 30 pounds of luggage with us. But there are factors making this easier. In addition to regenerative braking, electric motors are also significantly more efficient. Gas motors are, at best, 35% efficient. That is, only about a third of the energy they consume is converted into usable power. The rest is waste heat. Electric motors can reach as high as 99% efficient, but let's call it 90% from battery to useful power given other losses in the system. From that alone, batteries need to be only around a third as energy dense as gasoline before they can fully replace gasoline, which isn't the case at all. Gasoline, at just over 12,000 watt-hours per kilogram, is around 60 times more energy dense than that theoretical 200 watt-hours per kilogram battery pack. A 100 kilowatt-hour battery is the equivalent of just over 3 gallons of gasoline, while weighing significantly more. Accounting for the greater efficiency of battery electric systems, that's only the equivalent of a little under 8 gallons of gas in terms of usable energy. But do batteries need to improve that much before electric aviation is viable? A gas-powered Cozy has a range of around 1,200 nautical miles. That's over 6 hours of endurance. I personally would want to take a bathroom break and stretch around hour 3. Is there a point where the extra endurance doesn't really matter? For endurance, and especially ocean crossing flights, you absolutely want as much range as possible. However, most general aviation pilots will never do an ocean crossing flight. The first ocean crossing by electric plane will be amazing. Kind of like how, once electric cars got to around 300 miles of range anxiety mostly stopped being an issue? Yes and no. Part of why 300 miles is fine for electric cars is because cars go slower than most airplanes. 300 miles allow you to drive for 3 to 4 hours at highway speeds. Another reason why 300 miles is fine, and much more interesting, is the increasing ubiquity of fast charging stations. Creating that network is much more of a logistical than a technological challenge, meaning it's something we can get a head start on now. Several companies are already installing DC fast chargers at airports. Beta, who I've mentioned before, is building out one such network. They're focused mostly on the northeastern United States. They're primarily building air taxis, and the eastern seaboard is the most population-dense part of the US, which makes it a great place to start. Regardless, it's really exciting to see this already being rolled out. I really hope that even small airports have reliably working DC fast charge stations. Any place that sells avgas should also have this infrastructure. Having DC fast chargers should be a thing that unlocks additional federal funding for the airport. Not that it'll happen anytime soon in the US. Once we as society have built out a good network of charging stations with decent coverage, I think that for general aviation, you only need 3 hours of endurance at cruise speeds plus reserves. With 1.5 hours turnaround, an hour for charging, plus 30 minutes for other ground activities, you'll be able to make 2 to 3 hops in a single day, which is fine. As important as fast charging stations are, like with electric cars, it's a mistake to focus only on DC fast chargers. Destination chargers capable of fully charging a battery overnight will need to be built out at FBOs and at least some tie-downs, as well as chargers in hangars. All of this is basically non-existent right now, and there's not much hope in the future without state or federal investment. Electrical service at hangars in the US is extremely inconsistent and entirely non-existent at tie-downs. Many hangars have fairly limited service that's only intended to run lights. Some have more substantial service and can heat the hangar. Some hangar owners have already installed electric car chargers, so assuming the ports are compatible, they're already set. Like at-home charging of electric cars, these slower chargers are a necessary part of what makes electric aviation not only viable, but preferable for owners. DC fast chargers are necessary for long trips, but most small general aviation flights are local, pattern work, local airport hops, and so on. Being able to skip stopping by the fuel pump before or after your flight will dramatically improve the experience. Similarly, having overnight charging at your destination will enable you to leave when you want without having to wait an hour for a DC fast charger. Part 4.5. More battery limitations. In addition to energy density, there are also other limitations in current battery technology. Unlike vehicles that consume fuel, battery electric vehicles don't become lighter as they use more energy. They're the same weight with 100% charge as they are with 0% charge. Fuel-consuming vehicles become lighter and therefore more performant as they use fuel. You don't really notice this in gas cars because the gas tank is a relatively small portion of the vehicle mass. A fully fueled but otherwise empty Honda Civic is only 2% heavier than one with an empty tank. A Boeing 737 MAX 8 at max capacity and full tanks is 25% lighter once it has exhausted its fuel. On the other side of performance is battery longevity and maintaining capacity. As everyone with a phone has experienced, batteries lose capacity as they age and go through charge cycles. I'm actually not that worried about this. Yes, phones lose a lot of their capacity quickly because you end up charging them every day or even multiple times per day. And so for a phone battery rated for 500 charge cycles, you've used all those charge cycles in less than a year and a half. For electric vehicles, not only have electric cars been driving us, pun intended, to create longer lasting batteries, but with a horrifyingly typical 20-mile each way commute and a 300-mile range vehicle, you're going through a charge cycle on a weekly basis. With that, even a 500 cycle battery will last nearly a decade. Newer vehicle batteries are rated for thousands of charge cycles. So for flight schools, yeah, this is kind of a concern. They'll be flying enough that they'll end up replacing the batteries every couple years. But flight schools will be pricing in the cost of battery replacement as part of their rental price. For private owners who will only fly maybe a couple times a week, with maybe a couple big trips every year, not so much. There are also ways to improve how long a battery lasts before it starts to noticeably lose capacity. Current lithium batteries last longest if they're kept within about 10 and 90% state of charge. So if you want your battery to last a long time, then you're giving up 20% of your total capacity. This actually doesn't matter that much right now because the minimum required VFR reserves means you're legally expecting to land once you're at about 24% state of charge. For airplanes, you must have enough endurance to make it to your first destination and fly for an additional 30 minutes during the day or 45 minutes at night. With a 90-minute total endurance, this means you're planning to use at most 2/3 of your available energy. If you start at 90% total charge, this corresponds to landing by the time you reach 24% total charge. As energy density improves, this will become more of a limitation, but that won't be an issue until max endurance reaches 5 hours, which we're a long ways away from. Maybe future battery chemistries will improve on this. For now, it's not that bad of a limitation, as so long as you budget for it, you'll be improving your capacity each time you replace your battery pack. This is definitely a looking for a silver lining thing. as a brand new 100 kilowatt hour battery will cost you like $50,000 in cells alone. That's new engine money. Part 5. Solid state batteries. Speaking of future battery chemistries, solid state batteries have been promised for at least a decade. These promise to be safer, more energy dense, have faster charge speeds, longer lifespans, and all around better than current lithium-ion batteries. There's a lot of hype here, but not much actually available yet. A bunch of companies have announced production samples or have completed test runs, but as far as I can tell, as of October 2025, nobody has actually made a mass production run of solid-state cells yet, at least not ones intended for vehicles. Even once that happens, it's going to be years before anyone except large car companies can get these cells. Aviation as an industry just isn't large enough for any of the players in it to have any kind of priority access to these cells. It's hard not to be excited about this. Some of these announcements represent a massive leap forward. 400 watt hours per kilogram? That's a 40% improvement over Panasonic's NCR2170M from 2021. And this is still the very early days of solid state chemistries. That said, it's important to be skeptical here. There isn't anything in mass production yet, and we'll see if the production cells actually hit those numbers. Part 6. Solar. Okay, so batteries are heavy. Solid state batteries are on the horizon, but are at the very least several years off. What about other ways to power aircraft? How about solar-powered aircraft? These have been around for a lot longer than you'd think, and at first glance, they seem like a great idea. Instead of carrying all the energy you need in heavy batteries, why not put lightweight solar panels on as much of the horizontal surfaces as you possibly can? That should enable you to fly much further, at least on sunny days. The issue is that solar panels just aren't efficient enough. The aircraft which have been specifically designed for solar power are not aircraft you would want to ride in as a passenger. Here's the Solar Impulse 2 from 2014. It's giant. 73 feet long, 236-foot wingspan. That's wide-body airliner kind of dimensions. Here's the kicker. It was only designed for one person, max speed of 76 knots, daytime cruise speed of 49 knots, and a nighttime cruise speed of 32 knots. The massive size requirements stems from the fact that solar panels offer their best efficiency when they're facing the sun, but airplanes are not free to orient wing-mounted solar panels for best efficiency. These panels are all mounted flush with the surface, and that surface is generally facing directly up. So near the equator during the middle of the day, when the sun is directly overhead for several hours, then you don't need that much solar panels to charge your batteries. But as you get further and further away from the equator, and especially during winter, you'll need to compensate for the suboptimal sun angle by adding more and more solar panels and by trying to use less and less power. That's how you end up with these very large and slow airframes. The Solar Impulse is a demonstration vehicle, specifically designed to run only on solar power. Most discussion around solar-powered human-carrying aircraft is much more about using solar power to extend the range and endurance of flight, not on enabling indefinite flight. I ran the numbers on this a few years ago for my Cozy. Even if I added solar to all the available horizontal surfaces, I'd only be able to fit a little over a kilowatt worth of solar cells. Assuming optimal angles for every cell, that's still only increasing my expected endurance by about 10 to 15 minutes. That's just not worth it. Solar has its place in aviation, but that place is on the ground or on top of hangars, not to replace batteries in aircraft. Part 7. Hybrid electric. There is some interesting work with hybrid electric power plants. Think using battery electric power for taxiing, takeoff, and landing, but engaging a gas motor for cruise or as a generator to recharge the batteries. I consider this, like hybrid cars, to be a bridge technology. Something to make light and medium aircraft more sustainable while we iterate and improve on battery technology. Additionally, like hybrid cars, this is a bit of the worst of both worlds. You end up with an electric vehicle that still has all the complexity of a gas vehicle in exchange for not that much less weight. It makes sense for larger general aviation aircraft, think something like a King Air or a Pilatus. Amp Air has several flying aircraft demonstrating this, but again, bridge technology. It'll be useful to make aviation less unsustainable until either batteries become better or fuel cells become more of a thing. I already think that for small aircraft, anything with 4 seats or less, it's just not worth the added complexity. Either go all electric and accept the downsides, or keep it gas only. And this especially applies for private owners who care much more about the cost of maintenance. Part 8. EVTOL. I'm not really a fan of these. The technology and engineering is fascinating, of course, but the use case being sold, bypass traffic in dense urban areas, is not something that appeals to me. I'm going to leave it at that, but I'll just say I'm solidly orange-pilled. Anyway, most of these are aiming for around 100 to 150 mile ranges, or a little over a third that of an equivalent capacity helicopter. But these are going to accomplish that by being much heavier than the equivalent capacity helicopter. For example, Joby Aviation's air taxi aims for a 150-mile range with a max gross weight of 4,800 pounds, all to carry one pilot and 4 passengers. Compare that to a Robinson R-66 helicopter. Same seating capacity, more than double the range at 400 miles, and nearly half the max gross weight at 2,700 pounds. Which makes sense, given current limitations of battery technology. Part 9. Airliners in long-distance travel. One technology I've left out so far has been fuel cells. I'm not really a fan of fuel cells. They don't make sense for smaller aircraft, and they have their own trade-offs around weight, storage, fueling, and safety. But for airliners, maybe? Airbus has been working on their Zero-E airliner since 2020. Originally planned to enter service in 2035, they're now targeting between 2040 and 2045 to start service. And per the one source I used for this, that's primarily because there has been very slow progress deploying hydrogen fueling stations at airports. Though I wouldn't be surprised if there are other factors contributing to that. Airbus is claiming a range of 1,850 kilometers and able to carry about 100 passengers, which means they're aiming for this to be used for short-haul flights, which, while actually the lowest emission kind of flights, are the easiest to electrify. We have to start somewhere, and every little bit helps. Tangent: electric trains. Electric trains make far more sense from a sustainability point of view. Airliners should really only be used for intercontinental travel. A few years ago, France banned short-haul flights for routes where you can take a train in less than 2.5 hours, which is really just 3 routes or 2.6% of the short-haul routes in France. Even this very conservative approach has reduced emissions from aviation in France a measurable amount. Not by that much, a 3.4% reduction in the year after it was implemented. The rest of the world saw an increase in aviation emissions over the same time period, indicating that this mostly symbolic policy really punched above its weight. If we as society replaced all short-haul overland flights with frequent electric trains that can average at least 90 miles per hour or 150 kilometers an hour, then aviation's share of global emissions would drop significantly. Unfortunately, long-haul flights account for more than half of aviation's greenhouse gas emissions, so we still have a long ways to go to eliminate aviation's effect on the climate. Conclusion: is electric flight viable? Right, so where does this leave us? Battery electric flight is only viable for a few niche use cases right now. Almost everything has an endurance of around 90 minutes. There are aircraft coming out soon that will be more viable, and there's some really interesting developments going on in solid-state batteries that look like they may enter production in a couple years. I'd love it if the first flight of my Cozy used a solid-state battery pack. We also need to build out charging infrastructure. Right now, there are basically no overnight chargers built out, aside from private owners putting car chargers in their hangars, or what flight schools have for their pattern work aircraft. The DC fast charging networks are being built out, which is great to see, but they're still pretty small. The charging situation should improve over time, though it'll likely require federal investment to become much more ubiquitous, or at least legislation to force compatibility. Given the current US regime, that seems unlikely to happen anytime soon. For larger aircraft, they also have a long way to go. Airline companies have been investing heavily into fuel cells, which have their own issues, and we won't see fuel cell aircraft enter service until 2040 at the earliest. Battery electric flight is actually more viable. We're at least seeing battery electric aircraft right now. So again, sustainable flight faces significant challenges right now and is really only usable in a few cases, though those cases are absolutely game-changing. In 2035, maybe for the more efficient small aircraft. 2050, yeah, for short-haul flights. For longer-haul flights, that'll unfortunately take much longer. So what does this mean for me? I've been planning to build my Cozy since 2018. I've long since been aware of the problems facing electric flight. Why did I choose to build an electric airplane knowing all this? Well, first, electrified aircraft need to exist if we want aviation to continue to be a thing. But more importantly, I'm building this as an aspiration and as a statement both of hope for a better, more sustainable world and determination to do some small part to make that world possible and to inspire others to do what they think will help. I hope you enjoyed this and learned something. I have a bunch more things I've been working on that I'm super excited to show you. Please subscribe to make sure you see them. I'm Rachel, thanks for watching and happy flying.